All right, now to start things off this morning, I'm really excited and pleased to introduce Kristen Cox, the Executive Director of Governor's Office of Management and Budget. Her work has spanned from the nonprofit world to the United States Department of Education to the state of Maryland, and now as a leader here in Utah state government. Through her career, Kristen has shown herself to be a fierce champion of the power of effective governance and public service to the citizens. She's been a key force in applying the theory of constraints and other process improvement practices to Utah state government through her success framework. By integrating operational excellence with the state's management and budget practices, Kristen and her team are working closely with all cabinet agencies to improve the state government operations with a focus on quality, capacity, and cost. So please join me in welcoming a true navigator, Kristen Cox, to the stage.
Water?
Yes, absolutely.
Here, over here.
Right here.
My goal today is not to fall off the podium, so if I start getting close, make a buzz sound or something, right? Like an alert sound. It's great to be here, and I have some colleagues from work that showed up. That was so nice of them. I'm not sure if they want to see me or get out of the office a little bit, but it's great to be here. I know many of you in the audience. Really appreciate Route 50 for the work they're doing to highlight innovation in government. It's a lot of work to put this together. Hillary and your team, Mitch, Kate, thanks so much for having us. So I have some strong opinions. Is anyone shocked by that? Let me share some of those. I am going to do a son's power. Oh, Garen, my new best friend in the back, is going to help me click the slides. Right? So if I'm speaking to a slide that doesn't exist, just work with me on it. Okay? The first one is really how do we get breakthrough results in government? I think innovation for the sake of innovation has become a meaningless term. We innovate for purpose, and the purpose is to get a result for the taxpayers or the customers we serve. So I want to go through this idea today of practical innovation. I don't think innovation is like having cool workspaces where people play ping pong, or that's only for the Steve Jobs of the world, but I think innovation can be an actual systematic process that we all go through if we use the right kind of thinking. Who in the room, and I'm going to ask you to actually raise your hand and then somebody has heard theory of constraints before. Raise your hand and then somebody tell me if most people are raising their hands or not. Yes, many or not many? Not many. It's a really cool body of work that was developed by Ellie Goldratt. He was a physicist by training, a brilliant man who started to look at the scientific method and the ideas of cause and effect into different kinds of environments, right, other than just the sciences. And the whole concept is to get people to think clearly. There is a lot of noise out there in our systems, in our budgeting processes, in our stakeholder groups. There's a lot of noise. And the goal is to avoid responding to the noise and to focus on the very few things that can give us the biggest results. So I'm going to walk through this. I want to start with this idea, you can go to the next slide, Garen, called the seductive 7. These are traps I feel like a lot of us can fall into. I call them seductive 7 for a reason, because we can see it, we can touch it, we can feel it, we can take quick action on it. But my experience is these things may help at the right time, but by themselves, they're not helpful. They can distract us, absorb and eat up our critical management time, very precious management time and attention, and get us marginal improvements, maybe 2, 3, 4%. So seductive 7, we look for more money. Obviously, I'm a budget person, so I'm pretty tight. People come for asking for more money, and I'll tell you, in every system we've seen there's hidden capacity. Have not seen one yet. We look for more money. We look for more technology. And again, technology may have its time and place, but after we go through it, I'll call here in a second the essential 7. We look for if we just train our people more, right? It doesn't matter if our entire process is broken. We'll just keep training people to work harder and longer on a broken process. I may just want to have more data. This could be controversial. Not saying that data is a bad thing, but sometimes I think we have too much data and we don't understand the key questions the data should help us answer. Data is only helpful if it's information to help us make a decision. And we can actually operationalize the decision into a process. So I think we jump into data too much, too quick, spend way too much money on it without actually making it operational and helping us make decisions. You can see the rest of those. We call the seductive 7 for a reason. Blaming people, that's the favorite one of mine because I do it so easily. It's everybody else's fault, right? We really try to get people to stop and think about not jumping into these quite yet. Again, they may be enablers and they may be the right thing to help us at the right time, but only after we've thought clearly about the problem we're trying to solve. So let me go to the essential 7. I'm going to go through, tell you what they all are. Garen, you can just flip to the first one. Because of time limits today, I'm only going to talk about the first 3. There are 7. Let me go through the 7. The first one is think big. The second one is embrace constraints. The third one is focus on the problem to solve. Okay, and I use the word the for a reason. We're very clear. We're not going to solve a billion things. We're going to solve one problem. Then we want to look at not compromising. Then we are going to take a look at, I'll just talk about these very briefly. Don't compromise. Make the change real. Stop doing things that aren't helping. And then finally be patient, persistent. Those sound pretty basic. There's a lot to each of these. I'll talk about the first 3. The first 4 of these are around the planning side of innovation. The last 3 are around the execution. And I have a lot of strong views about planning and execution. In government, we do a lot of planning. Often it's not very thoughtful. And at the end of the day, it fails at execution. And we have to have both. Again, for the purposes of today, I'm going to speak on the planning side of this. Let me just ask you this. What's one thing we always know is wrong with forecasting and planning? We're always wrong. We'll never quite get it right. So planning is important with the understanding that in execution, that's where it really, really becomes real, and we've got to have rigorous execution on this stuff. Okay, let's talk about the first essential, think big. Oh my gosh, everyone's like, well, duh. If I said in this room, how many of you think you can have a huge impact in your organization? I'm not talking in the noise, right? When we look at system improvement, we don't look at the noise of variability, which is 4 to 6% generally in systems. We're not interested in that. We're looking at big leaps of improvement in your organizations. When we set a goal to improve all system performance in government by at least 25%, that seemed crazy to some people. We've had agencies that have just killed that goal, 60, 70%, 40% or more improved performance. So if I said, how many do you think you could? I'm sure everyone would say, yeah, of course we can. You know, peer pressure, we want to believe big, but sometimes we get trapped into some mindsets. For me, this is such a fundamental mindset concept I want to spend some time on. So if we think we can do well in organizations and make big improvements, then why don't we? I mean, what holds us back from believing that? I've kind of seen this in myself, so some of these are my own issues that I will disclose, and I've seen them with other people I've worked with. The first one is this idea, and I think Tony said it great, we cannot solve problems at the same level of understanding we had when they were created, right? We have to go beyond our own existing bounds of knowledge and understanding. We have to commit to go someplace we've never been before and we don't know how to do it. That is scary. When we committed, quite frankly, I won't tell the governor this, but at the time when we said 25%, I wasn't quite frankly sure how we were going to do it all. We never know. We have to commit to something that's bigger than we understand and figure out how to get there. I'm blind. Did you guys know that? It's not a fashion statement. Or lightsaber, which my youngest used to think it was. When I was going blind, I did a training I call it a boot camp for the blind. So I was going blind and I had a little vision left, but finally had to come to the reality that I had to learn to live my life a different way. So I did a boot camp training for the blind. You wear sleep shades for all day, every day. I was there for about 4 months because you have to learn to rely on your other senses. And to graduate, you'd have to use power tools and you have to barbecue. And then the final graduation thing, they would drop you off in a location. You'd have your blindfolds on and they'd put you in a van and they'd drive you around the city. They'd drop you off and you had to get back to where you started, but you could only ask one question. So the goal was that you could be dropped off in the middle of China and find your way back. And we were in Baltimore at the time, and honestly, you guys, I joke about it, but it's so true. It's like, please don't drop me off near the heroin district. Like, I don't want to wander into that place, so keep me far from there. But to get trained for this, every day we would do some training out in the community. And one day I was at a park across from the training facility, and I was in a very difficult park with lots of winding pathways, and I could not find my way out of that park. And I was really discouraged, and I stopped. And my teacher at the time was named Tony Cobb. He was far back from me. He had always let us kind of hang ourselves with our own rope a little bit, let us go out and explore. And he saw that I just stopped. And he came up to me, and I've used this story many times because it's had such an impact every day of my life, quite frankly. He came up to me and said, Kristen, you've got to learn to walk through your confusion and your uncertainty. You've got to push through your fear. Essentially, he said, Kristen, you're not going to get any new information by standing still. You have to take a step into the unknown to get more information. And it was life-changing for me. Being blind, I often don't know where I'm going. But I know that if I take the next step, I'll figure it out. In organizations, we have to learn to feel comfortable with being in the unknown and in uncertainty. We have to commit to something that's so impactful for the citizens we serve and our customers in a way that we're not sure how to get there. Because the moment we know how to get there, we're not pushing ourselves far enough. If we start building solutions based off of what we know today, we will never innovate. Innovate is going into the unknown and committing that we can figure it out. And I see smart, brilliant people every day who commit to that and have the ability to figure it out if they dare to dream big. So that's one thing, we feel the uncertainty. The other thing is when we see some big goal we want to accomplish, we can out of the gate start thinking about all of the problems in achieving that. We are great at griping. Would you agree that? We're great at identifying every reason why that thing is difficult to achieve. We can say we want to make a huge impact in, I won't say a system, but whatever organization, and they can start out of the gate saying yes. We actually call it this, yes buts. And there's a time for that. We actually will legitimately ask people for their yes buts when we are getting into solution mode. But we will out of the gate saying, yeah, but let me tell you all the reasons why that won't work. The problem with that is we give more power to the obstacles than we do to the belief in our goal. We believe more that the obstacles can overcome us than we can overcome the obstacles. Obstacles are simply opportunities to tell us where we need to focus our energy and our time. That's it. They're simple problems to solve. And we will literally shut down on big opportunities because of the obstacles ahead of us. You just blow them off. You list them, you're aware of them, and you work through them, but you don't give them the power. The power, the commitment to the goal should always exceed the power we give to the obstacles. Another reason why I think we kind of get, maybe held back a little bit is that there's some shame. Has anyone heard of Brené Brown and her TED Talks? Yeah. She's great. Her work on shame is actually fascinating. You guys should look at it. But there's a real power in if we're doing our jobs and somebody comes to us and says, you need to do a lot better, there can be a little ego check. Like, wait, are you saying I haven't been doing a good job to date? Have I not been doing a good job? Have I been missing something? I remember when I was over the Department of Disabilities in the state of Maryland, it was the first department of its kind in the country. We stood it up and I put out my first state plan. And I would never do it like that again. I look back how I did that, how many years ago. It was a traditional plan, goal statement, little bit of action steps. It was horrific. I would never do that again. But I had to do it the first time and struggle with it to figure out how to do it wrong before I could do it right. The Wright brothers, there's that museum up at the Hillfield Air Force Base. So cool. It shows from the Wright brothers' clear tell, we built the SR-71 Blackbird, famous biplane. The Wright brothers couldn't have just created that. They had to start from where they were. Then you take the next and the next. So this idea of shame that I can't acknowledge that we're not as good as we could be, that's just part of the journey. You did as best as you could. Where we are today, we're doing a great job. But there's still way more big opportunities. So don't let shame or ego ever block us from taking on new opportunities. Another reason, a couple more on why I think we can sometimes struggle in this area is that we've experienced process improvement or big initiatives in the past, and they have failed. We actually just surveyed all of our employees, 23,000 of them, to get their input on what's working and what's not. And it was really interesting. 17% said that they had been involved in process improvement or big initiatives before, and they failed. So they failed, and then we get cynical, right? Anyone cynical in this room? Cynicism is a canker to innovation, right? It's a cancer to it. So yeah, sometimes we're going to be a little cynical, but don't let past failures do it. I think another really important reason is this idea of opportunity cost. Sometimes in government, we can just see what we want, the benefit of what we're doing. And if we think we're doing it good enough, what's the urgency? Like, why? Utah was already a high-performing state, right? Why come and say we're going to do 25% more? Actually, we've achieved that goal. We've hit it almost 26%. At the end of this month, we're setting a whole new set of targets for all of our agencies. And you're saying, wait, we just hit 25%. Can't we stop? There is always an opportunity cost for not innovating. If we, let's say, have an organization that's thinking it's costs for growth are going to be $1 billion over 10 years, and that looks pretty solid, and that's been their trend in the past, and it seems reasonable. Why change it? There's a cost, though, to it if we don't. What if you could actually bend that cost curve and save $300 million out of that $1 billion over 10 years by making a few modest changes? That's $300 million that go into employees, that could go to services, that could go back to the taxpayer. Often we are blind to the opportunity cost for not changing. We call it the hidden treasure. We have to ask ourselves, if we don't change, what's the opportunity cost? There has to be a fire in your belly for wanting to change, because it's hard and it's a lot of work, and sometimes you get a lot of griping going on. You got to have a reason for change. And if you can't see the pot of gold in front of you, if it's not explicit, go find the hidden treasure. What's the cost for not changing? So at the end of the day, if we can't at least believe change is possible in big ways, not little marginal things, not chasing the middle things, but like big, massive impacts on our organizations, then we need to rethink what we're doing in government. It's not our money. We all know that in this room. That's why you're here. It's not our money. And the customers, me having been on, I was on Social Security disability. I went through voc rehab. The idea of employment seemed absolutely impossible to me. But I had a few mentors that came in and made a difference. And we have people who need our services. Their lives, their ability to be successful and contribute are dependent on how good we are. So it matters. Okay, second deal. Oh my gosh, Garen, I totally lost track of you. So I don't have any more slides on that one, so go to the next one. The next slide is embrace constraint. So the theory of constraints is based off the idea in all organizations, if you had a chain, a really long chain, there's always in the chain going to be one weak link. And if I pull on the chain, where's the chain going to break? At the weak link. Our belief is that there's opportunity to improve everywhere in an organization. There's waste in every part of an organization. We're not interested in chasing all that. We're interested in focus, in chasing the 1, 2, maybe at most 3 biggest changes that will give us the biggest impact. And I'll walk through why this is so important. But, oh my gosh, embrace constraints. Okay, so let me ask you guys this. How do you know if you've achieved your goal? Sometimes we put a big goal out there, improve the education system, blah, blah, blah. Sounds great. How do you know if you've achieved it? Let me give you this analogy. If I asked you guys, I want to put a big goal as I'm going to make $1 million over the next 6 months, and I get $1 million in the next 6 months, did I achieve my goal? It's a trick question, so you may not want to answer. What if I achieve the goal, but I destroy my family relationships, or I rob a bank, or I engage in white crime? Did I achieve my goal? The goal by itself doesn't mean anything until we put boundaries or constraints around it. We actually call it success criteria. What are the tangible objectives that the goal needs to become real, to put form to it, that put constraints? Actually, in the design world, they call it design constraints. What are the boundaries I need to specify in order for this goal to be successful? That's what I said in my first plan of the Department of Maryland of Disabilities. I put out a goal. Increase the employment of people with disabilities. That sounds like a great goal, doesn't it? But it wasn't enough. So, for an example, you're going to go buy a house. If you're going to go buy a house, that's a great goal. You want to buy your own house. You've been living in your parents' basement. Failure to want syndrome. Time to go get a new house. You go get your new house. Is that enough? No. You would have to know I need this much square footage. This is what I can afford for a mortgage payment. This is the quality of house I want. I want it near these kind of schools. Or I want to be by the mountains. You put criteria around your goal to give you constraints and boundaries. In government, sometimes we don't put constraints and boundaries on ourselves. In our shop, we love them. They tell us where to focus, and they also allow us to innovate. Without constraints or boundaries, we get into lazy thinking. The easiest thing to do in government is to put a goal and just ask for more money. That's lazy thinking. The easiest thing in government is to put out a goal and just work our people to death, or say I need more staff, or work overtime, or say I need an $80 million IT project. Now you may, down the road, but then we don't start there. Those are the seductive 7. The lazy thinking is to start with the seductive 7. Innovation happens when we put constraints around ourselves to force us to think differently. So when I was going through my little transition as a blind person, I wanted to skydive. I don't know what was in me. I just had to get it out of my system. But it wasn't enough for me to skydive with a tandem because it felt like I was cheating. Like if I'm going to do it, I want to do it by myself. So I put constraints on it. I needed to skydive, I needed to survive, and I needed to do it solo. That forced us to innovate. How would a blind person skydive solo? Easy thing would be to skydive tandem. But the constraint forced us to innovate of how I would get communication from the ground and understand what was going on so that they could give me cues and guidance for when to know to pull that thing, the parachute. Yeah, you can tell I'm a qualified skydiver. We have to put constraints around it. Elon Musk, everyone heard how brilliant he is. Think about the innovation on the rocket he built. The rocket he's trying to make to actually compete with the United States of America is to be cheaper per pound in costs. It wasn't just I'm going to make a rocket. I'm going to make a rocket that's reusable, and he's going to make a rocket that's cheaper per pound than the United States government. Talk about constraints around your goal. That's where his innovation's been happening because he set out not just with the goal to make a rocket, but he started to put form and shape to it. So let me give you an example in actual state government. We have a goal to improve all of our systems, including social service environments, right? It's really easy to go improve process or permitting, but it's another thing to go into a social service environment. And believe it or not, social service environments really aren't as complicated as we think they are. We'll talk about why we think things are complex here in a second. But we go in and we say, okay, our goal is to reduce dependence on government assistance. Worthy goal, we've heard it a million times, but that's not enough. We have to put shape and form to it. So we put constraints on ourselves. We have to improve the system, reduce reliance on government, but we have to do it while not increasing the budget at all. Improving the morale of our employees, improving the expertise of our employees, engaging the families more so we actually have a measurable improvement in the trust factor they have with our employees. And the solution has to be scalable. How many pilots have you seen that are great, but they're going to cost $5 billion trillion to scale? It's got to be a scalable solution. To date, we've just implemented the pilot, but to date, we've been able to reduce cycle time by half. Our trust factor has gone up measurably, and we've seen the same results in adult probation and parole, significant improvements in their risk scores. And we don't have time to talk about that. But it begins by putting constraints on ourselves so that we're forced to innovate and get out of lazy thinking. Okay? So enough on that. I'll go to the third one, and then we'll just wrap it up. So if we embrace constraints, put success criteria, the third thing, and I think this is one of the most important elements, I wish we could spend 5 hours on this one, focus on the problem to solve. This is what I find so fascinating with strategic plans. The assumption with the strategic plan is that it's a solution to a problem. Would you agree? There's a problem, and so we have a strategy to solve the problem. So I had one of our team go do a research project for me on a bunch of different strategic plans. Some in the state, some federal government, and some private sector. What percent of those plans do you think had an actual problem, clarity on the problem they were trying to solve? Less than 30%. Of the 30% actually went and read the problem statements, and maybe half of them, in my opinion, hit a good standard. That's my opinion, take it or leave it. Most plans are moving forward with solutions without even understanding the problem they're trying to solve. This is why I always get concerned in the seductive 7, because we move into this, we move into strategic planning, we move into technology, we move on to this stuff, and we do not have crystal clarity on the problem we're trying to solve. And without that, none of our strategies matter. So is this why how many of us are a little cynical about government strategic plans? Like, raise your hand. Like, all of us probably, right? And I just talked about not being cynical, and here I am. Part of it has to do with execution. Part of it is thinking clearly about the problem. So let's talk quickly about the problem and why we are challenged with it. There's 6 things, actually maybe 8, that I think are problems with it. The first thing is that we ignore the problem entirely, or we assume it's so obvious we don't even have to state it. If I went into a room and I asked people, what's the problem with our prison system? How many answers do you think I would get? If I had a group of 10 people, how many answers would I get to that? Like 10 times 10, at least 10, and maybe some more. So everyone's going to have their opinion on what the problem is. And then we're supposed to create a strategy around that? So first of all, we ignore it and don't even acknowledge it, and we just move forward with our strategic planning, assuming that the problem is so clear and assuming our strategy is the answer. But if we don't know the problem, we can't design a solution. So that's the first thing. The other one I want to spend some time on is we treat symptoms rather than root cause. And I've almost come to hate the word root cause. There's a great quote by Thoreau: for every 1,000 people chopping at the leaves of evil, only one is chopping at the root. I love it. Actually, I said it, hacking at the leaves of evil, only one's chopping at the root. So let me give you an example. Garen, there should be, oh my gosh, I skipped the quote by Stanford that constraints. What do you see on the PowerPoint slide? Or is it over here? Where is it? To my left? Both sides. So what's on the PowerPoint right now, Garen? Okay, so this is an example of, so we'll go into an organization. These are symptoms in a project environment. I'm not even talking IT, I'm talking a generic project environment. And by the way, government, all of government can be boiled down to 8 kind of environments. We overthink and we overcomplicate all this. But project environment. So I go into this and we talk to some project people. I don't care if they're doing audits or IT. They have a project they got to implement. Projects are defined by high touch time, big variability. So I go into my project environment. People are going to say, hey, look, I have a lot of pressure. So I start all my work at the same time. I start my work at the same time so I don't have time to gather the information. So I start work without having other requirements. Then I go down and I get a lot of rework and I have rework problems. And then when I have rework problems, people are mad at me and they come and they do change order requests and they try to work around it. They get frustrated and start bringing their own IT people. And then they want more work and we start getting more work done. And then there's errors and problems and we got to do rework. There's all these symptoms. And so what we can tend to do, I'm oversimplifying in this environment, what we'll tend to do is try to go fix each one of these, right? And we'll start creating all these controls and all these individual processes to fix all of these. And we'll have big like change order requests, management systems, and we'll do all this stuff. I remember when I was at the Department of Workforce Services running that, I went in for the first time and I thought I'd do listening posts. I'd hear all the issues from all the employees. That was a fun year. You get what you ask for, right? And so I'd start chasing every symptom. We had problems with our imaging system. Let's try to fix that. We had problems with our intake. Let's fix that. We'd have problems here, there. We start chasing everything. Let me flip this next slide, Garen. But what if we could start to understand the interdependencies between all the problems? We call them undesirable effects because they are effects. They're effects of a cause. What if we could start understanding the relationship? There should be like a vicious cycle, right? Yes. Yes, thank you. What we'll do as organizations is try to understand the vicious cycle. How do all of these interrelate? What's the connection between all these undesirable effects or symptoms we see in our system? And you'll start to see these vicious cycles. We can go into any environment and we'll see the vicious cycle. Let's talk taxes. Anyone aware in the state of a tax initiative, right, to increase taxes in the state? Our Schools Now initiative. What happens? People get exemptions and credits. The base narrows. When the base narrows, there's less revenue. When there's less revenue, there's increased taxes. When there's pressure to increase taxes, people want more exemptions. And, it just is this whole vicious cycle. We get into them all the time. What we want to do is find the one thing in this vicious cycle we have control over that we can break. And if we can do that, we have a chance. You can go to the next slide. I think the next slide, Garen, highlights we don't have full requirements when we move into a system. Yes? Does that show that? This is oversimplified because we talk about a concept called full kitting, which is getting all the information we need before we take action. It's not quite as simple as it's portrayed here. Go to the next slide. If we can break, let's say, the concept of we need requirements, before we go into a whole new project, we don't start anything until we have everything we need to work. We're doing a pilot right now with road construction. We don't start building roads till the easements are figured out, till we have all the requirements done. We just don't build until we have the information. And I guarantee you guys in almost every environment, we see this problem 99% of the time. We start work before we're ready to work. Anyway, you break that cycle and you can flip it into a virtuous cycle. People have the information. They don't start work until they're ready to work. So they don't have rework. Things don't slow down. Clients aren't doing workaround. We reduce change orders. It goes around and we get a virtuous cycle and all of a sudden we can start fixing our systems by focus. Theory of constraints is about focus. So let me go to one other element in this. The biggest bottleneck in any organization is management time and attention. We act and ignore the reality that management only has so many hours in a week. So we launch these strategic plans with 50,000 billion action steps, and management has the time and attention to focus on 2. So the question is, if management time and attention is limited, and there's only so many things they can focus on, why not have them focus on the few changes that yield the biggest results? And if that's the case, we have to understand cause and effect. We have to understand the relationship between all the undesirable effects we're seeing in our system and focus on the few that give us the biggest leverage points. Innovation happens when we're focused. All right, So we break the cycle, and that's just a huge one for me. A couple other problems I see when people define the problem, they ignore it. They ignore time and attention. They treat symptoms versus root causes. They also define the problem as a lack of something. We have a lack of teachers in the state. We have a lack of providers in the state. Lack of something is not the problem. If my kids come into the kitchen, I used to do this to my mom all the time. My mom's in the audience. There's not enough food in the house. We have a lack of food in the house. Is that the problem? It's an undesirable effect. I certainly not. My kids come home and we don't have enough Honey Nut Cheerios in the house. It's something I don't like, but is that the cause? No, the cause is I haven't had time to go to the grocery store because I'm working all the time, right? Or the problem may be for some families they don't have enough money, or whatever. I couldn't get my Uber driver to drive me, whatever. There's some other issue behind that's driving that. So whenever you hear people say a lack of something is a problem, they still haven't done a deep enough thinking. Okay, we still haven't thought deeply enough about what the real problem is. We define the problem too narrowly. Sometimes this is a concern of mine. Let's take transportation. Transportation, we can build more and more roads, and we can build roads faster and cheaper, which is awesome. That'd be great. But when you step back and you get a broader group of stakeholders and you look at a broader group or array of undesirable effects, you'll start to see a different picture. Meaning transportation is part of an ecosystem that has a lot to do with land use and land use zoning and planning, right? If we had communities where we didn't need as many roads, transportation would actually not have to build as many roads, or at least their cost curve over time would bend. Part of it is we can just get into the problem we're in and just go deeper and deeper into that problem. We often need to step back and say, what is this broader system, this issue I'm seeing as a part of? Remember when I said I went to workforce services, I started seeing everything individually, the imaging system, the intake system, all of our call center. We are managing the call center. We are acting like we were a stupid call center. That was all the data that my folks brought, was call center data. We weren't there. We were about making decisions, and we had to get focused on improving our throughput and our quality. I'll talk about that finally in a minute, but we have to see that whatever problem we think we're struggling with is usually part of a broader system. So we have to step back, get up a level, and see what are the other things impacting the problem we're currently seeing. We have to broaden our vision on it. A couple other things on this. Very often with problems, we don't have a structured way of defining the problem. We kind of have this brainstorming thing going on, or we ignore it, or we just kind of do a quick 5 whys, which, whatever, if you're in Lean or Six Sigma, just do a quick 5 whys. Problems, obviously, move on. This one, honestly, with organizations, I'd rather spend 4 months on this phase or 2 months or whatever. I much better, way more time getting this one right and getting clear thinking on what the real problem is before I would ever, 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 ever jump into strategic planning or innovation or solution design. Because again, solutions help us solve problems. If we don't know the problem, we're in trouble. So we could spend a lot of time on this, but for the sake of this, I'm going to wrap that piece up. Let me just say this. Let me ask you guys in the room, call it out. What do you think the problem is with blindness? Just say it. It's okay. I'm not going to be offended. What's the problem with being blind? You can't see. What else? What other problems would a blind person face? Getting around. Technology. I hate technology. It's my bias. What else? I mean, people would say a lot of things, right? You'll go to these training centers for blind, and they'll have a list of what's wrong if you're blind. And they'll try to fix all these little symptoms. I had a mentor once, Dr. Kenneth Jernigan, who was brilliant. He got TOC, and he didn't even know it. Theory of constraints. He said the biggest problem with blindness is not blindness itself, but the misperceptions and stereotypes we have about blindness. He got the core problem. We didn't chase every other symptom. When I went that 4 months of training, it was to beat out every bad expectation I had about blindness. Do I face them still every day? Yes. And then I have to go back and remind myself, what's the core problem? If we don't get that problem statement right, and the alternative is the problem with blindness is the blindness itself, and your lack of vision is your problem, that is a very different way to live your life than believing it's a misperception problem. If we don't get this problem statement right, we can mess up people's lives. We can waste taxpayer dollars, throw it down the toilet. And you can see I'm strongly opinionated on this. Most of our plans fail miserably because we miss this point. And we are chasing symptoms, we are chasing noise, and we are missing the core problem. If you want to innovate, innovate on something that matters. All right. I feel better now. I don't know about you. I feel better. Okay. I'm not even going to talk the last 4 things. I'm just going to say it. Don't compromise. We see generic conflicts all the time in government. Centralize, don't centralize. Specialize, don't specialize. Raise taxes, don't raise taxes. Automate, don't automate. Everything in life, the conflict is change, don't change. And there are reasons why people are doing the status quo, and there's reasons why we need to change. And normally what we do is bounce back and forth between the two before we really understand the underlying needs and solve those. A good solution, if I centralize, decentralize, I want to centralize for economies of scale, I decentralize for flexibility. And what do? We fight on decentralize, centralize. But innovation happens when I create a solution that gives me both economies of scale and flexibility. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but we never compromise in our solution design. Once we've identified the problem, we solve for needs. Look up a YouTube video from Clay Christensen on the needs for people, why they buy McDonald's milkshakes. It's so funny. But anyway, it's a fantastic thing. We don't compromise. We make the change real. This is where we go to execution. Strategy is interesting, but all strategy is a direction of a solution, not the solution. When we actually start getting into tactical implementation, standard operating procedures, that's when we're actually solving the problem. When people on the ground have to make a physical change of how they do their job, then we've actually solved the problem. Not until then. So we make the change real for people. That's huge. What does the front line do differently? We wire it into the system, so it's not all about training, but it's mistake-proving the system so it works. 2 final pieces on it. Oh my gosh, what's my 6th one, guys? Oh, stop doing things. We are great in a government to do initiatives. Initiate means to begin. We want to get out of that and go into cultures of completion, not cultures of initiating. We want to end work, not just start it. And what we love to do is start things because it's fun. What's really hard is to stop. TOC is about stopping just as much about starting, because we got to stop the stuff that's distracting us or not helping us achieve our goal. And we could spend time on that. I won't. And then the final thing, be patient and persistent. Most really good things take 2 years. I mean, you can go into smaller systems and flip stuff pretty quick. But if you want big, impactful changes, don't plan like on a 4-month, really quick, do a cute Kaizen and you're good to go. The ones that really matter are going to take time, and it takes a lot of work. I remember when I first started learning Braille, it felt like they poured salt onto a piece of paper and said, good luck with that. You gotta be joking. I learned, our oldest son was bored. I was 27, I couldn't read, I couldn't do Braille, and I wanted to be able to read to my son. So I took a Braille letter a day. If I could just learn 1 Braille letter a day. And then I learned 2, and then I could read Hop on Pop. Remember that book? I was so proud. And then I could read The Hobbit, and that was my first book I ever read. And then I could read Braille, but it took a long time. Really important changes take time. I just believe in government. I do. I believe the good that government can have on people. But I also understand if we do it right, we can have real bad effects on people. So innovation is all about removing the limitations in people's lives, coming up with solutions that really, really, really impact problems, and being very, very focused. Anyway, thanks so much for having me today. We could spend a lot of time on these issues. They're so critical, but you have a great lineup of speakers, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.